So let me introduce you to our moderator. A massive cheer, please, for Andrew Blum, author. That's Blum as in Plum Blum. Andrew Blum. Followed by Jenny Bofinger-Schuster, SVP of Sustainability and Cities at Siemens. Ict Greener, the Minister of Environment of the Republic of Armenia. Brian Lilly, the former CPO of Equinix and now board member of Lumentum and Talent. Lily Onovapakpuri, partner of Kapoor Capital. John Sheridan, founder and executive chairman of ERI. And our keynote speaker, the charming Texan with the French name, Kurt Aber, former chairman of the US Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon, or is it good evening? I just know that we are between you and a very cold beverage, and that's not a great place to be. But before I start, and I had a really long introduction, but I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to say with my French heritage that I'm so thankful for the Armenian people. I'm thankful for Diana, who is my personal assistant, who has just done a fabulous job. I'm thankful for Armin, who has asked me to be here. I'm thankful to be here with the minister. Thank you and privileged to be here with you. But this has been a great conference. It's been a great conference. Andrew is our moderator, and Andrew has asked me to do one thing, and that is to piss you off. So that's what I'm going to do, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about what is green, what is not green. Who knows what green is? No, you don't. See, we're starting, so we're getting somewhere already. I want to talk about how green is green, and really what is green? What does it mean? Are we really tracking the numbers? Are we really paying attention to what it means? I want to bring to your attention something that was recently in the Wall Street Journal. This was May 20th, so not that long ago, in the Wall Street Journal, article by Mark Mills of the Manhattan Institute. And he laid out some interesting realities. He said, first, the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, they highlighted that energy demand worldwide in 2018 grew by its fastest pace in the decade, driven by a robust global economy with fossil fuels meeting nearly 70% of the growth for the second year running. Mills posits a reason for that fact, using wind, solar, and batteries as the primary sources of a nation's energy supply remains far too expensive. So we've got to figure that out, right? Cost is an issue. The economy is always an issue. Because when it comes to the price of electricity, when it comes to the price for sustainability, who do we have to worry about? Regulators, right? More often than not in jurisdictions, regulators decide how much we get to charge for the commodity, right? And you have to be nice to regulators. I learned early in my career, when I wave at a regulator, I use all 5 fingers. It's a good rule. That's kind of funny, guys. I know you're tired, but we don't wave one finger, we wave all 5, right? So that's what we want to do. Another fact included in the article is what's happening in Sweden. Sweden's big shift to wind power has not only created alarm over inadequate electricity supplies, it's depressing economic growth. That is particularly dangerous for Sweden given the nation's bid for the 2026 Olympics. Same is true in China. Although China talks a big renewable game, they have quietly restarted coal power construction, building hundreds of coal plants for emerging economies around the world. The IEA, again the International Energy Agency, foresees the U.S. supplying nearly 3/4 of the world's net new demand for oil and gas. Green advocates are aggressively attempting to persuade governments, taxpayers, to deploy huge tax on hydrocarbons to ensure green construction. Let me give you the reality from the financial point of view. There's little chance that wealthy nations will agree to subsidize expensive green tech for the rest of the world. So what does that mean to us? That means we have to do a better job, right? We have to understand the true cost of a green initiative. And when we look at that green portfolio, we need to look at it not as it sits, not as it produces energy, but from cradle to grave. What did it cost for that commodity? What did it cost for that asset from cradle to grave? And we have to focus on that. So I want to challenge you to think differently. When we say renewable, we generally think of what? Wind and solar, right? So for the purposes of this conversation, let's spend a little time on solar. For instance, solar power has significant and multidimensional environmental impacts. So we have to look at all phases of the solar power and not just the energy producing phase. 3 points. What about construction energy and materials? What about installation? What about retirement of the assets and recycling? Production of the photovoltaic panels has a carbon footprint and creates a series of waste, liquids, and products harmful to the environment. 3 examples: extraction of quartz, the crystalline form of silicon, right? Use of high energy furnaces in production. And 3rd, production of metallurgical silicon. This all produces carbon dioxide in the process. So again, cradle to grave, let's think about that. Let's really be sincere and intellectually honest when we talk about green initiatives. Western countries have improved on production and the environmental impacts. A large portion of panels are produced in China, and much of the energy needed is being generated currently from fossil fuels, such as coal, so the carbon footprint is heavy, right? At the end of the solar panel's life cycle, it's treated as waste, and as many toxic substances have to be dealt with. There's the added large land use issue, but we're not going to talk about that today. That's a separate issue. But there are no emissions associated with the generation of electricity from solar, so that's perfect. But the life cycle of the solar panels from cradle to grave produces emissions. Mining, production, transportation, installation produce 3 to 13% of the energy that will be produced by the solar panel during its 30-year life cycle. These are numbers that have been released by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of the Department of Energy of the United States. So I tell you all this just to kind of get in your mind that cost matters. Utilities pay attention. And that we have to have a balance between what we do environmentally, the environment itself, and the economy and economic development. Again, regulators care. If we want silicon to be green, we must pay attention and we must do a better job. ICT cannot be supported from renewable-only energy. We know that right now. There's no question that that fact is true given our current power-producing renewables. Can we get there in the future? Will we get there in the future? I think that depends on us. I think it may be possible, but it's not possible right now, and we need to understand that. Therefore, what? Well, important points in making ICT greener: we need economic-friendly materials, we need sustainable products, we need supply chain responsibility in the procurement process, and we need to think about reuse and recycling. We need to start thinking about that now, not at the end of this 30-year period. And we must focus on low energy intensity, low water intensity, waste minimization, low carbon technology. In other words, looking at it again from cradle to grave. There's a need for clearer strategic direction when it comes to making Silicon Valley green. The 5G networks that are coming will be data hungry. They will be hogs. They will use a lot of energy, and we need to be watchful. Powering of high-tech infrastructure and data centers demand high energy use. We're getting better at that, and one of our panelists are going to talk about that. We're improving upon it, and the point is we have to continue to improve upon it. Is the ICT industry doing enough to protect and conserve valuable resources such as water and fuels used to power the grid? In addition to direct emissions, we must consider renewable technologies from the point of view of the entire life cycle. I'm going to say it one more time, cradle to grave. We have to do things differently. We have to be intellectually honest. I'm going to close by saying this and turn it over to Andrew, and I look forward to that. There are a lot of things I don't understand. I don't understand why so many people nowadays understand rights, but they don't understand responsibilities. That puzzles me. I don't always understand my wife and children. I stay puzzled with that. And I really do not know where seedless oranges come from. But I'll tell you what I do understand. I understand we have some brilliant people in this world, and I understand that if we all work together, and if we balance that economic need with that environmental need, I know that we can make a difference. I know that we can make Silicon green. But we're going to have to think differently. God love you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Kurt. You promised a bracing introduction. That is absolutely one. I promised you the last question, but I'm going to give you the first question instead. The piece that I feel like you left out that I feel like is important, sort of crucial for this conversation, is the risk, the likelihood of catastrophic climate change, some of which we're seeing already. In your work experience, both your client work as a lawyer and in the energy business, I'm curious what you're hearing about that climate risk specifically from clients and colleagues.
First, let me say I am not a scientist. I'm just a really bad lawyer that just knows energy. But what I've made my living doing is mitigating risk. And if I have a risk, I think it's my job to mitigate that risk. So what I do, as I understand climate change, climate sensitivities, CO2, I know that I have risk. So in understanding that, I'm going to do something to mitigate against that. And if I think there's a chance of some type of global harm, I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't happen. And I think that is where the utility industry as a whole is, whether they believe the science or don't believe the science. I think everyone understands we need to be doing better.
Thank you. I think it's worth pointing out as well that I come from the United States, and the United States remains one of the few countries that does not believe the science. But I think that the portion here that we need to focus on is that we have a huge range of potential risk and potential possibility. And I feel like that, for this, incredibly, the range of expertise up here is remarkable. And I really want to sort of make sure as we talk that we kind of oscillate between, not so much doom and gloom, but partial doom and complete gloom. I think those are the two realms. I also really want to keep in mind the social impact of this, the recognition that it's not just about the production of energy and the consumption of energy by IT, or the production of the computers, the materials, and the way that we get rid of those materials, but also the social impacts of that. As I look across the panel, I feel like you are the person to address that. I wonder, coming from Kapoor Capital, if you could kind of sort of lay out how your firm differs in terms of its focus on social impact.
Yeah, so we invest in early stage tech companies who are closing gaps of access and or opportunity for low income communities and underrepresented communities of color in the US. This is specifically important in terms of climate change because if you look at the communities that will be most affected by climate change, it is the low-income communities. They're the ones who can't afford to just pick up and move, once they become their houses become part of flood regions, or, once the temperature rises, they can't afford to just turn on the air conditioner. So we're looking at solutions that are low-cost solutions, but ones that benefit those communities most in need.
Thank you. And in terms of specifically the impacts on the environment, is that is that multidimensional? How do you kind of arrange those different the different ways those communities are affected and technologies can help that?
Yeah, so our whole portfolio is dedicated with a social impact mission, and we believe that environment is not just one thing. So it's not just energy, it's not just infrastructure, but it is all of those things, including the health. So asthma is commonly found in communities where the environment is bad. So we look at how do you positively influence the health care outcomes? How do you positively influence the infrastructure choices that are made in communities, as well as energy?
That's interesting. Jenny, I want to turn to you briefly with that, because you come at a sort of similar potential for change in different levers as working with sustainability at Siemens. Can you talk about what the different levers are that you see at a company of Siemens scale, and maybe you should lay out that scale to begin with?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and I already said I'm going to be one of the biggest Armenia fans after this conference, because it's a very impressive stay here, so thank you very much for taking so good care of all of us here. Well, speaking about the levers, we are one of the largest technology companies in the world, and we do feel it's required to take responsibility. And I'm saying this now as the responsible for Siemens, but I'm also saying this as a mom. And when I leave to such conferences, I have my 5-year-old who really starts to get a bit annoying because he keeps asking me whenever I go, and he's like, are you meeting again important people? And I say, yes, of course. And then he says, oh, you still haven't fixed it. So he understands that there is a problem and that it takes quite some time to really fixing it. So coming to your questions, what are the levers from our side? Well, one lever obviously is that we ensure that we act responsibly in our own operations. For this, we have pledged to be CO2 neutral by 2030, and we actually did that before the Paris Agreement came into place, so as the first larger industrial conglomerate worldwide. And this is important to us because with that program, we are actually testing solutions in-house before we then sell them to our customers. So basically, we eat our own dog food, or maybe nicer, we drink our own champagne, right? And we show internally that these solutions are there and that they also make sense from a business case of view. And then the second lever, and that's actually the bigger one, and the one I also like to speak more about, is offering the right solutions and innovations to our customers all around the world. And to just giving you one number, by doing so and by offering these solutions in energy, in mobility, in industry, in building, and in healthcare to our customers all around the world, our customers saved around 600 million tons of CO2 last year. So if I compare that, for example, with Germany, where I'm from, that's 2/3 of the emissions in Germany. That is huge. And that's where I actually like to spend also my personal time, is in reaching our people at Siemens, that they have sustainability in their mind when they reach out to their customers.
Thank you. Minister Grigorian, thank you for joining us up here. I'm curious how that question applies to you, how Armenia thinks about its balance of environmental sustainability and an economic development.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this panel. It was a huge mistake for decades separating economic and environmental issues, and it was another big mistake looking for business as enemies, because for decades environmental solutions were taken by government, but looking businesses and other stakeholders as their enemies. But now we see that most of R&D is coming from private companies, and so many environmentally friendly solutions that we have now, it will be LED, it will be solar panels or others, that it's not only economically efficient but environmentally friendly. It's coming from business. So now it's not a privilege of governments to decide what kind of regulations and what kind of limitations should be done, because huge money is spent by private companies. Of course, the first argument is economic efficiency, but it's bring also environmentally friendly solutions. So now it's time for all stakeholders. It will be government, it will be private sector, it will be, the scientific institutions to work together, because this discussion for a long time, if you are going to develop economy, so you should forget about environmental issues, or if you are looking for environmental solutions, so you will get a poverty, and poverty is one of the main environmental problems, I believe. So it's time that all decisions should be harmonized. So if you have an economic decisions and you are not considering environment factors, anyway after some time, it will be 5, 10 or 50 years, definitely you will have a problem. And we have some local issues here that 10 years ago it was a very good solution economically, but now we're facing a problem of degradation of environment ecosystems, and it will cost more to solve these issues. Again, when we are only looking for an environmental solution without considering economic factors and social factors, then you have this primary impact on nations, primary impact from the people, from the poverty, that it's destroying your ecosystems. So everything should be harmonized, and I believe that the best economic decisions based on environment solutions, at the same time, the best environment solutions is based on economic solutions.
That alignment's fascinating, yeah. John, you were speaking about that earlier. I wonder about the ways in which you can align at points the economic motivations as well as the environmental.
Yeah, well, let me just say, first of all, Parev Hayastan. I'm almost 57 years old, and it's not only an honor to be here, but it's very emotional to come after 57 years on this planet and traveling around the world because of my business and other interests, to finally come home to the homeland of my family and be here in Armenia. A few weeks back, I was lucky enough to be invited by Minister Gregorian to have a meeting in New York City. And I was so inspired by his economic and environmental vision that when I was invited to come to this conference and attend, my automatic thought was, I have to be here, I have to come home, and I have to support the minister and the prime minister's vision of environmental protection in my homeland combined with appropriate economic development. Now, I started a company 15 years ago in California named ERI. And I never knew where it was going to go. We just had a vision then to keep electronics out of landfills in the United States, to recycle electronics. And in 2004, electronics were the fastest growing solid waste stream in the world. Today, they are still the fastest growing solid waste stream in the world. Just think about what we rely on from our iPhones and our iPads and our gadgets in our cars and our homes that make our life better and more connected. all of those materials can be recycled responsibly and create great outcomes. So when you recycle the 20 or so million pounds a month that we recycle, nothing goes to a landfill and no waste happens. All of those materials that come out of recycling old electronics go for beneficial reuse: the steel, the plastic, the copper, the aluminum, the gold, the silver. Nothing goes to a landfill. And there's a massive energy savings to the environment. Our company last year offset about 850 million pounds of CO2 emissions when we recycled almost 200 million pounds of electronics. So economic sustainability can merge with environmental sustainability, and we can all participate in making the world a better place. So that's the position we come from, and we want to help bring that message of responsible recycling to Armenia. And maybe if we do one here in Hayastan, maybe we change the name from ERI to ER High. How's that sound?
Again, it's very interesting to me that we have up here both, when we talk about the sustainability of IT, we have both those material flows and we also have the data center use, the kind of actual electricity that's consumed in our massive IT use across the board. Brian, until recently you worked at a company called Equinix, a company I know well that's really at the heart of the internet, a huge data center footprint. I wondered if you could talk a bit about some of the things that Equinix was doing in order to reduce the energy use and think about these issues.
Sure. So thanks, Andrew. That was awesome. I think for you entrepreneurs out there, if you haven't heard John talk passionately about saving the planet and what he's done, I was a customer of his when I was the CIO of Equinix, and he saved our ass, to be truthful. So it sounds like it needs to be an ERI here. I would think one of you should stand up and meet him afterwards and say, I'll run it for you, John. And then the other customer, I'm a customer of Jenny with Siemens, which has really helped us with automating the data center platform that we run. And then finally, I just want to, before I answer the question, say thank you to my personal assistant, Ani, to Hasmik, to Kelsey, to the whole crew here. I know you said you're the #1 fan. I think you're #2. I'm the #1 Armenian fan right here. I love it here. And I had a great walk this morning all over the city. So Equinix is a global data center provider. There's about 200 data centers around the world and growing. And you can imagine we consume a lot of energy. Global data center of the sector is about 416 terawatts of energy a year is data centers. Equinix is a small fraction of that, but in 2015, we made a commitment to be 100% renewable. And we didn't put a time frame on it because it's hard to do. It's really hard to do when you have a global footprint. But as of last year, 2018, I left in April, we were at 90% in renewables. And these are via energy purchase agreements we have. We have Bloom Energy cells for cell production of power, co-located with the facilities. And our goal is to be 100%. Again, they don't want me to put a year on it, but I think within the next year, I think we'll be 100% covered. But you've got to make a commitment to it, because the minister's comments about fusing economic decisions and social decisions, and you're investing in this for, in particular, the disadvantaged communities, it's really hard because this is a classical economic problem of a social good that no one necessarily really feels responsible to pay for. And, you know, we were talking about ERI. ERI, we would pay a fee to take care of as an enterprise. We have about 8,000 employees. All of that recycling has to go through ERI in the US. But it's hard to find that if you're in 24 countries. And unless people can make money at it, sometimes it's not viewed as my job or my responsibility. And unless you have a 5-year-old and have that perspective, or your perspective about fusing, you don't have people step up to the plate. And I think it takes all of us, and it takes a commitment. We made that commitment of our own volition, but I think really the world needs to make that commitment.
I wonder, I mean, as we struggle with this question of balancing environmental sustainability and economic growth, I'm still stuck on the notion that we're missing something, that we're kind of missing the fact that we could have a major economic shift. I don't mean in system necessarily, but that the risks of climate change themselves could have economic impacts that are not being considered at the moment. I wondered if any of you would pick that up and sort of consider if we are missing something in the risk of this, not of what's economical today, but what might be economical going forward over the next 10 or 20 years. I mean, you say put a timeline on it is always very hard, but that's there is a timeline. There is a key timeline. Thank you, Jenny.
I mean, yeah, someone needs to do it, right? So, I mean, I could quote now, I'm also not a scientist, and I could quote now, I guess, the numbers that we are all aware of, and when we will run out of the threshold that we actually have to stick to, and that it's getting warmer and warmer, and that there are more disasters, I could do all that. I escape a little bit from your question, and I answer with something that I have heard at a different panel, from someone who is in the construction engineering industry, so something different than I'm in. And he basically said, I can now either build something positive that helps us to prevent the disaster and to change something, and we can spend money on this, or we will, and again, I'm quoting someone else, being in an engineering company, we can also, after all the disasters, then always rebuild everything. So for this guy's business, it's still business. So it's also with the question of talking about the risk mitigation that you also referred to earlier. If there is a risk, you typically want to mitigate it. That is normal management and risk management behavior. And so I think that's what we should go for.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
just a quick comment. I think this has got to be the classic economic problem of a social good that no one feels responsible for is the role, in my opinion, of government. And I think your leadership here in Armenia could be a lesson, in particular in the United States, where we're a big consumer. When you saw, I think your comments were 70% of the net new demand, or 80%, 70% was coming from the U.S., then I think countries like the U.S. as a consumer, the government needs to step up and make this required. Because when I look at IT companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, etc., a lot of them are of their own volition driving their supply chains to become green, primarily because of this. They feel the social good, but also because they don't want to be on Greenpeace's bad list, right? And they know they're selling to consumers that care about this. So I do think that there's a role for government here. I don't know if you agree, but
you're saying our government, the U.S. government?
Well, remember, it's an election year next year.
Okay, because he mentioned people who don't believe in science, and we know they live in the White House.
But where the political will doesn't exist, that's the kind of companies Ulili backs that make an impact. That's the kind of company Brian used to build and run. That's the kind of company Jenny works for. So companies step into the voids and the breach and then make the world a better place where the political will doesn't exist. And that's what's changing the world today. That's what's pushing us forward. Those are the companies that you guys are going to create in the future that's going to make the world a better place.
Yes, I would like to respond also in relation on government. Of course, we are talking about adaptation and mitigation costs, but if you have a change on precipitation, if you have a change on temperature, it will change your economy whole. It will change your agriculture, if it will change your energy sector, urban development. And if you will not create adaptation plans for every single sector, then after 5-10 years, you will spend more. So what is the role of government to pioneering the sectors? What will be in 5, 10, 15 years? Because in Armenia, in this moment, we are already facing temperature increase 1.3%. In many areas globally, you will see the difference. By our climate communication in 2030, we will have less than 9% less surface water. It will impact agriculture. It will impact energy. So we need to invest now on adaptation and mitigation to prevent, besides the environmental and climate issues, to prevent some extra cost that will come. So this is very important in the role of government. But for private companies, of course, to be green, to be more environmentally friendly, but I believe people from private companies, they have children, and the youth that is coming with more ambitious plans, they are asking do not use single-use plastic. They are asking do not pollute more, so you should follow them. You should follow. So the youth generation, the young people will change a lot. But it's again, I'm returning to my first point, it's not a separate actions by government or private company. Government should set the frame, but working with scientific institution, working with private sector, working with R&D to set proper regulations. But yeah, I mean, in the beginning we talked about what scientists are saying about climate change. Climate change is real.
Mr. Grigorian, could you continue a bit and give us some examples of the things that Armenia is doing, or programs you mentioned before, something with the UN this fall?
Yes, Armenia, very active player on global climate negotiations and the processes. I would like to inform that we have a very ambitious plans on reforestation, because tree planting actually one of simple solutions of climate change, but how to do it technologically, what kind of tools to use, it's not such simple. We need some more knowledge, more experience, because there are a lot of problems to solve. But for last 1 year, we developed some kind of unique tool that it's harmonization of debt for nature swap with the commitments undertaken by Paris Agreement. And we presented it during the General Assembly, this UN General Assembly just 10 days ago. It was a pledge of Armenia. The idea that most of developing countries, they don't have enough money to do adaptation and mitigation costs, but at the same time they have a lot of foreign debt to serve. So if we will find a solution and we'll create a platform that will be some swapping between debt and between a commitment undertaken by developed countries, it will be beneficiary for both sides, because instead of paying in cash starting from 2020, this $100 billion that was proposed by Paris Agreement, so developed countries can switch it in 10 or 20 years. And it's good for developing countries to find money now, to act now, to start reforestation, to start other actions. So I believe it's a good platform not only for Armenia, because it may work tomorrow for Nigeria and Germany, for other countries. So it was presented to UN, it was presented to our partners, and we are in a process, believe it will be successful.
Thank you. Lily, I wonder if you could talk about the sort of small-scale innovations, those kind of startups that you see that can have an impact in the space, that can begin to consider these questions.
Well, and I'm also going to jump on the bandwagon and use this opportunity to shout out some people. So thank you to my PA, Aren, for being awesome, to Kim for bringing me to Armenia, and to all of you for coming to the last session of the day. I appreciate that commitment. So to the companies, I mean, we have companies in our portfolio who have chosen, since they haven't been able to get the legislation at the national level, to work more locally with city officials. So one of our portfolio companies, Aclima, has partnered with many cities in California and with Google, their Google View cars. And so they are attached to every Google View car in California, and they use their tool to map out the environmental aspects of each city and each neighborhood. Block Power has also partnered with the local city government in New York to retrofit buildings that are not sustainable. We have Revivin, another company that has worked with many of the top tech companies to make sure that waste, similar to what you're doing, that waste, electronic waste, is not only reused, but also end up in the hands of low-income communities who may not have access to top tech.
And Brian, John, you both are on boards, have your own companies and startups. What kinds of other activity are you seeing of the different realms of potential? How much enthusiasm from folks who are doing early stage startups, or with your own story of how you got in, how you started this?
In the sustainability space, or in
sustainability more broadly? Because I think, again, it's this question of, is this ripe? Is this a real economic opportunity, or is it doom and gloom?
This is one of the greatest opportunities ever in terms of sustainability and investment right now. We're an early stage investor, my wife and I and our family, in a solar company that's just tearing the doors down. Because again, when the political will doesn't exist, then companies, then great entrepreneurs that want to make an impact, like all of you Lily's investments, step in the breach and have an opportunity with a chip on their shoulder to thrive. So we're seeing this as one of the greatest times for innovation in sustainability. And then also, this is also a great time for innovation such as robotics, AI, and cobotics to then be employed by a company like ours and deployed by a company like ours for better processes and procedures to make our company more sustainable and scalable. So technology can support technology that can therefore be a solution to the technological revolution, really. That's the way we look at it.
Jenny, I'd love for you to pick that up. I mean, again, I love the range of scale we have up here. It couldn't be broader. What have these new products or new spaces done across Siemens, and how does that emphasis lie for research and development as well?
I mean, we heard now about the data that is heavily increasing everywhere, that you need data centers for it, that you then can improve the green factor of the data center, and the kind of great applications you can also use. And they really range from sort of all topics. It starts in energy. For those of you who have been to the lightning round in the lunch session, if you can reduce the losses in the grid because you use data in a very good way, then this is a sustainable solution. And this is based on ICT. If you can improve the traffic in a city and you reduce the commuting times, you first of all improve the quality of life of all of us who are stuck in the traffic, but of course you are immediately also having a sustainable solution. And I can now go on with many other examples. If you go on Industry 4.0, and if you have a full-fledged simulation of the product design digitally, you of course don't have as much scrap, so as much waste as you had in manufacturing before. So they are actually in all areas, by applying digitalization in a smart and good way, you can have very sustainable results and sustainable impact.
Go ahead, Brian. Do you point to that?
When you talk about innovations, I think it's from small companies, but it's also from the deployment of technologies like Jenny was talking about. One of the things that we did was, we used several techniques and technologies to actually drive the demand is what the demand is, but if you can drive efficiency, in essence, it looks like your demand is decreasing because you're able to handle it more efficiently. And whether that's via energy cells or it's airside optimizers for actually using ambient air, if it's, this IoT is an incredible opportunity to drive adaptive kind of environmental controls. So if, I'll give you one example. We built this IoT platform because when you think of a data center is a big box of things, and those things are generators and crack units and air handlers and all these other things. All of those things actually generate data that is control data that actually will drive efficiencies. So if you can collect that data, process that data, and actually provide algorithms to adaptively change the controls, you can actually drive your PUE down. Google pioneered this in their data centers. It was called Google DeepMind. They actually wrote an algorithm. We took that algorithm and we actually improved on it, and that's what we built into our big data platform running on Google. Google has actually gotten to 1.1 PUE. PUE is a critical measure that measures how much of your energy that you produce and are using is going to the IT equipment and how much is wasted or unused. 1.1 is an incredibly low PUE. And so consolidation and then employing these techniques, some are coming from startups, some are coming from university students, some are coming from data scientist master's degree students. This is how we're going to actually get to the next level of efficiency.
So when you talk about these sort of new types of controllers, when you talk about sort of new efficiencies that come in, one thing that we have to acknowledge is all of the old equipment that gets sent out the other side of the data center. John, you talked about, you see it when it gets thrown in the trash, it shows up at your door. What are you seeing in terms of trends with IoT, with 5G, of how much that impacts the turnover in these businesses?
As Brian said, the explosion of IoT is a massive opportunity from our perspective. And what is somebody else's trash is somebody else's gold. So to us, it's gold when Brian calls us and says, come recycle in our data centers, to our offices, make sure everything gets shred, make sure everything goes to the right, is responsibly recycled. That's a huge opportunity. But there's three major trends that are driving the proliferation of electronics and the growth and explosion that we're going to see in the next 5 to 7 years ahead. One is the circular economy. Circular economy wasn't even discussed in the United States 10, 15 years ago. Wasn't even part of our vernacular. Big now in all the C-suites, not in the United States, but of course around the world, especially in countries such as Jenny's country, Germany, and other great countries in Asia, and Seoul, and South Korea and Japan, which were driving the sustainability revolution years ago. Number two, cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity is always associated with software solutions, the rise of great unicorns like Palantir and great other companies like that. Truth is, the other side of the coin of cybersecurity is responsible hardware destruction, because the data that's contained in the hardware needs to be destroyed responsibly. That's us. That's what we do. We're in the brand protection business. We protected Brian's brand when he called us. Number three, 4G to 5G is coming, and it's coming big. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the big carriers in the United States, who's a client of ours, told us two things. One, 4G to 5G is going to be bigger than analog to digital and bigger than black and white to color. As an example, they said, John, be ready to handle, among the three carriers, over the next 5 years, 1 trillion routers need to be recycled. They all have printed circuit boards in them, and they need to be recycled responsibly. And that's just one segment of what's going to have to be responsibly recycled in the years ahead. So 4G to 5G, circular economy, and cybersecurity, the hardware side, the hardware story, are huge drivers in the years to come of great and sustainable practices that can have also a great bottom line that tied to them. So environment, and economics can go hand in hand. Like I always tell people that ask me, how do you start a business? How do you do what you do? You can't save the world unless you make a profit first.
It seems hard to imagine with the scale of that hardware transformation that there is an environmental upside to it. You know, given the resources that have to go into it, given what has to be recycled out. How much value can you extract in your process?
A lot of value. I mean, all of the products that come in as full electronics, we are zero waste, zero landfill. So all of that goes out as commodities that go for beneficial reuse. So nothing goes to a landfill. So everything goes into a new product somewhere else in the world, to smelters that get made use into new products. So the real answer to your question, is that responsible recycling is not only profitable, there's also a huge social and impact bottom line to the planet at large. And that's what that message has to resonate with people. But honestly, recycling has gotten a bad name because what we have termed recycling in many countries, and we're going to use the United States as this small example, has been really dumping on other countries, Africa, India, and China for years, which is now starting to be cut back. And that kind of recycling, where we take our trash and we just dump it into other countries, is not real recycling. That's not sustainable, it's not profitable, and should not ever go on anymore as a practice.
And John, sorry, one more quick question with this. What is the time scale of the equipment that you're recycling? How long has it been in use?
Great question.
How long will it last?
Great question, Andrew. When we got in the business, we were recycling what was then, when my grandparents had a television set, it was a piece of furniture. It was around 25 years. Now when televisions come in, they're around anywhere from 18 months to 24 months. The turnover, the planned obsolescence on electronics is massive. And it's on purpose, obviously, because the innovators and the creators want to sell new products. The same thing goes for cell phones, and the same thing goes for tablets. The turnover is massive, so it's quicker than ever before.
There's one quick comment on exactly this thing. Not only handsets, where everybody needs the new iPhone or Samsung, but PCs. I was a CIO for many years, and one of the things that we talked about as CIOs is, are you treating your laptops or desktops as assets, or are they expensed? And more companies are moving towards that they're just expensed. Once you move them to expense and they don't have an asset useful life, these things are going out much, much faster. Even lease programs are driving this turnover, and if corporations are the number one consumer of electricity and of these electronics, those policies actually make the problem more challenging.
It's very interesting to me because it's the opposite problem that we have with energy generation. Kurt, you're still there. I gotcha. Yeah. I want to ask you about what you're seeing in trends in terms of the construction or the rejuvenation of energy generation assets, whether nuclear or new gas plants or even some new coal plants. How does that begin to change the mix that we see in the United States or globally over the next, again, not 18 months, but 20 years, 30 years?
Well, as you know, demand obviously drives everything that we do from a generation point of view, and the demand is more and more, although we are seeing some savings on some things that are going on now. Nuclear in the United States, from a cost point of view, not going so well, only because the newer systems seem to be costly. They can't seem to get them online. I think the latest one that Southern Company is trying to get online was targeted at 13 billion. I think it's at 25 and still not on. So when you look at those numbers, you say, well, really, what's the future there? We don't all identify as nuclear being renewable, but some of us do. You deal with spent fuel, but other than that, you don't have emissions, which is why we talk about the cradle to grave. It's really, I think you're going to start seeing smaller systems. I think you're going to see systems that are going to be closer to needs, making them smaller, closer to the transmission lines where they're needed. I think a lot of that is driven by cost. A lot of it is driven by problem citing, trying to get things where you need them to be most. So I think wind probably outweighs solar to me right now when I look at what regulated utilities are doing. I think you're seeing them do much more wind. Again, I think part of that has to do with the longevity of that and where they see the cradle to grave. So I think that's an issue that you're going to see moving forward. Let me cover one thing, though, that I think is important when we talk about investment in the infrastructure and particularly in the energy industry. In the energy industry, you have two groups of stakeholders when it comes to paying, or really three. You have the shareholders, right? You have the ratepayers, and then you have, we talk about government, but we all know them as taxpayers, right? So if you talk about taxpayers picking up the tab on some of these things, which obviously they have, the one thing I would tell everyone in the industry to do is be more creative. When we talk about the government, when we talk about taxpayers, that doesn't mean we need to get a wad of cash to throw at something. I had a situation with Entergy Corporation where we had a fine, and I went and fell on my knees and begged and said, hey, can I use this fine money to build a solar system for a school in New Orleans, Louisiana? And we did that. So we can be creative with monies and do some things where it doesn't always fall on the taxpayer. So we need to be careful about that. So I just say there's a balance, and let's strategically be creative in how we do this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, a company that I actually really like, and unfortunately I'm not an investor in because they're not taking VC money, is Connect. And power right now in California is a huge issue. 800,000 different buildings, will be without power at any point in time this week, just because our power grid is dealing with some issues. But this company, Connect, what they have done is gamifying saving energy in your home. And if you save, if you go under your usage for a certain day, they give you points, and then you can use that points to cash out, or you can use it to get gift cards for groceries or buy more energy efficient things. And what they have found is actually low-income individuals are more likely to do this, because this then becomes a revenue stream, an income stream for them, and they are able to then gain access to those energy-efficient appliances, which were previously out of their costs. Yeah.
Interesting. Jenny, I wonder if you could pick that up, both the efficiency side in the home or in commercial areas, as well as the generation piece. I mean, where does Siemens see the trends over the next 20 years? I guess it's really two questions: is how you want them to change, and what your customers want from that change.
That's typically the same, though. So
yeah.
We typically do what our customer also wants us to do. Well, if adding to the energy side, I mean, it's exactly what you said. We typically say it's going to be more decentralized, more decarbonized, and more digital. And I personally really believe that with sort of the moment where we have scalable solutions to produce hydrogen from renewables, I think this will be a very big game changer. That will change a lot. There are hydrolyzers out there that are out there. We use them. Technology is there. So the more this becomes a reality, I think this will be a big change. And then your second question was on the efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we always think of these two things together, the generation side and the efficiency side, you're in a unique position to serve both of those.
It's both, and on the efficiency side, again, obviously digitalization and in a first step, having the transparency on where you use energy is actually a big step, and in many cases people don't even have this transparency, and this will be state of the art everywhere pretty soon. And then with that you can start to optimize, and there are all sorts of solutions out there with which you can do that. So I'm pretty optimistic, to be honest.
Great.
But also maybe adding on, also optimistic because our customers are asking us for these solutions. They want to have that, and it's coming. And I think that's a great change and a very, very good transformation that we are on.
Minister Greener, I wonder if you might pick that question up and talk a little bit about trends in Armenia and both the generation side as well as the efficiency side. So I'm putting you on the spot there. If it's
just coming back for 4 or 5 years ago, it was a GF financing project in Armenia on efficient street lighting. And it was the time that was no any LED lighting actually in Armenia, and it was huge support by the GF program for co-financing of the change of the street lighting. And it was huge support that time, and by this program many streets in Yerevan and other cities was done change in LED lighting. Now in any project that it will be in the cities, you don't need this extra support because cost become cheaper and everything is cheaper. I remember that 10 years ago when I was in Germany and I saw these wind turbines that was receiving a huge subsidies from government at 9 cents, 10 cents per kilowatt. And at that time it was also a privilege of developed countries to subsidize and to support these renewable energies. But now we have a tendering in Armenia for solar panel for 55 megawatt and the tariff is 4 cents. Just few days ago it was another tender in Uzbekistan and company offered 2.5 cents per kilowatt in Uzbekistan. So price is going down and down, and in the point that it will be economically efficient, I believe then we will not need any extra support coming from international environmental funds or other institutions, but business will take the field, and then we'll start a huge reformation in the energy supply system.
I wonder, Brian, I think this might be where you're going, but as a way of finishing up, I wonder what you would be saying, what each of you would be saying if we were having this conversation in 2029, 10 years from now, because a lot of this is about where we want to go and where we are going.
Well, so in terms of efficiency, if I back up 10 years and I say why, even though data center usage has increased, the efficiency has improved. And when you ask what are the reasons, I gave you a few reasons of what data center operators can do, but there are things in the ICT industry itself that have significantly helped the, if you think, I don't know if there's any people from VMware here, but virtualization has significantly helped the efficiency. I mean, if I just give you the anecdote, when I became the CIO at Equinix, it was 2008, the fall, and then the first thing I did in the 2009 timeframe was I said I wanted an inventory of the servers, and it was in the time frame where the model was every time a business person wanted an application, they installed that application. They came to IT, and IT installed one system with storage and maybe clearly a network connection and a server, and that was dedicated. Well, when you did that analysis, it was 8% utilized across about 200 servers. So when you think about the waste, even though that's being powered, it's 8% CPU utilization. So virtualization, we're now at 90% utilized. So it just significantly is more effective. The other thing that's more effective is going from spinning disks in the storage arrays to solid state. Significant reduction in power usage and physical space. And so when you think about putting cold air where it needs to be on a rack where the heat sink is being the heat's being generated, it is a significant reduction in the cold air, and you can do cold air containment to make it even better. And then I'd say finally, I really think that cloud computing, if you start to consolidate and drive efficiency with expertise, and again I use Google as the example at 1.1, if you're a small data center in your small company or relatively mid-sized company in Armenia, in California, wherever, if you drive that 2.5 PUE data center to a 1.1 and you get that consolidation, that's what's also driving the energy efficiency at a macro level. And so we've seen this in the numbers.
And those trends can continue.
And those trends, so that's sort of where we've been going. I think what's coming more is as you move to chipsets like ARM that require much less power and much less heat, we talked a little bit about bare metal yesterday, and again, you're consolidating the footprint and the power requirements. And I think one of the gentlemen from a company I talked to, he's an Armenian, he said that they calculated a coefficient of throughput per unit power. And he actually invented that coefficient, and that was picked up by Juniper and Cisco and others who are now calculating how much throughput can I get on my boxes per unit power consumed. I really do think it's coming, and I do think the younger generation is very sensitive to this and will push this.
John, what does your business look like 10 years from now? I mean, when can you describe what a successful circular economy would do to your...
Our business is up this year 30% and will continue to grow at a very high rate over the next years ahead. But as a more macro general message, I just want to say to everyone who's out there and to my esteemed colleagues up here with us, what I feel we're at just the beginning point of the sustainability revolution. What can be done in energy and what's going to be done in energy and in reforestation and with water is going to be a revolution the next 10 years, and we've only just begun. And I always go by this very simple phrase for everybody: do whatever you can do, wherever you are, with whatever you have. And together we can all make the world a much better place.
Minister Grigorian, I want to give you the last word with the same question. Sort of, what does this look like in Armenia 10 years from now?
First of all, I would like to explain from biodiversity point of view how important is our country, because there are 35 biodiversity hotspots globally. Everyone knows about Madagascar or Amazon, but about Armenia and our ecosystem is not very well known. It's one of the biodiversity hotspots globally, and it's only 2 in Europe, 1 in Mediterranean, and second is our region. And we have a very unique places. We have a natural forest, we have a high concentration of biodiversity. So my role as Minister of Environment to assure that we will have a clean rivers, we'll have a lot of reforestation, we'll have a regulation on environment policy that will give us opportunity to live in a clean country, but not locally, because all these questions are not possible to solve locally. So it's a global effort, what we should do. So what I see in 1992 during the Rio conference, it was a speech of a young girl from Sweden, and it was a very famous speech, like Greta did in UN, but it was more argumented that. And she talked about the current environmental issues, and it was the first time for the Biodiversity Convention, Climate Convention, Desertification Convention. And we see in many areas of the world that during the last 20-25 years, a lot of problems was solved. You see in EU, you see in some other developed countries, you can see even in US, some cities what was in 70s, and now it's more cleaner and green. So I see that not only in Armenia, but globally, we will have a better environment situation. But for this, we need to work. And as I said from the beginning, it's not a separate work for government. It's an obligation for every citizen of this globe, not the country, but globe. So I see it very optimistic, and I believe that Earth will become greener, cleaner, if you will work hard.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for being such good sports up here and doing this. Thank you to the audience as well.
One more round of applause for our final panel, please. One more round of applause.